The sound of shattering glass made Penelope Hart drop to the floor before she even knew she was moving, her arms wrapped around her head in a position she had learned too well. It was only a bottle rolling off the general store counter, knocked over by someone's elbow, but her heart hammered against her ribs as if gunshots had ripped through the air. She stayed there, crouched behind a barrel of flour, her breath coming in shallow gasps while the shopkeeper apologized profusely to the customer whose purchase had broken. Miss, are you all right?" The shopkeeper's wife came around the counter, her round face creased with concern. "It was just an accident. No harm done." Penelope forced herself to stand, smoothing down her faded calico dress with trembling hands. Her dark blonde hair had come loose from its bun, and she tucked the strands behind her ears with fingers that wouldn't quite cooperate. "I'm fine. Just startled me is all." The older woman's eyes were too knowing, too kind. Penelope gathered her basket of goods and paid quickly, avoiding the pitying looks from the handful of other customers who had witnessed her reaction. Outside, the California sun beat down on Coloma's dusty Main Street with the unforgiving heat of August 1878. She walked quickly, keeping her head down, wishing she could disappear into the earth itself. She had been in Coloma for 3 weeks now, having arrived on the stagecoach with nothing but a carpet bag and the clothes on her back. The boarding house where she stayed was run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, who asked no questions and expected payment every Friday. Penelope worked at the laundry, spending her days bent over steaming tubs of water, scrubbing the dirt and sweat from miners' shirts and ranchers' denims. The work was hard, but she was grateful for it. Grateful for the distance between California and Missouri. Grateful that Thomas Wardell was 6 feet under in a cemetery outside St. Louis, put there by his own drunken stumble down a flight of stairs. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt hollowed out, like something essential had been scraped away, leaving only a shell that moved through the world but didn't quite belong to it anymore. The boarding house came into view, a 2-story structure with peeling white paint and a sagging porch. Penelope climbed the steps carefully, balancing her basket, and nearly collided with another boarder coming out. She jumped back so fast she almost fell, catching herself on the railing. "Whoa there." The man's hand came up automatically to steady her, and Penelope flinched so hard she did fall, landing on her backside on the porch boards. Her groceries scattered across the weathered wood. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to startle you." The voice was deep, concerned, and distinctly male. Penelope's vision was blurred with panic, but she scrambled backward anyway, trying to gather her spilled goods without looking at him. "It's all right. I'm fine. Just clumsy." Her voice came out high and thin. "Here, let me help." He crouched down, reaching for a can of beans that had rolled near her foot. "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "Please, I can manage." There was a pause, and then he said quietly, "All right, madam, I'll just leave you to it then." She heard his boots on the steps, the creak of the gate, and then the diminishing sound of his footsteps on the street. Only then did she look up and catch a glimpse of his back broad shoulders, a dark vest, a black hat, and sandy brown hair touching his collar. Penelope gathered her things with shaking hands and went inside. That evening at supper, Mrs. Chen introduced the newest boarder to the table at large. "This is Mr. Vincent Quinn. He'll be staying with us for a while, working on the Morrison Ranch outside of town." Penelope kept her eyes on her plate as the man took a seat across the table and 2 chairs down. She could feel his presence like a weight in the room, could sense the way he moved with deliberate care as he passed dishes and responded to the other boarders' questions. He was a ranch hand, she learned, brought in to help with the cattle drive coming up in September. He had worked spreads in Wyoming and Montana, knew horses and roping, and had a quiet way of speaking that didn't demand attention. She risked a glance at him once and found a strong, weathered face with blue-gray eyes and a day's worth of stubble on his jaw. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30. When his gaze started to drift in her direction, she quickly looked away. The next morning, Penelope left early for the laundry, hoping to avoid any encounters. The work was waiting for her in great steaming piles, and she lost herself in the rhythm of scrubbing and rinsing, wringing and hanging. Her hands grew red and raw, her back ached, but at least she wasn't thinking. Mrs. Beatrice Mallory, who owned the laundry, was a sharp-eyed woman with a voice like gravel and a heart softer than she liked to admit. She had hired Penelope without references, asking only if she was willing to work hard. "You've got a visitor," Mrs. Mallory announced around midday, jerking her chin toward the front of the shop. Penelope's stomach clenched with immediate fear. She wiped her hands on her apron and approached the front cautiously, peering around the doorway. Vincent Quinn stood hat in hand near the counter, looking decidedly uncomfortable. "Miss Hart." He nodded respectfully, staying well back from her. "I wanted to apologize for yesterday." "I didn't mean to frighten you." "You didn't." The lie came automatically. "I did, though." His voice was gentle, matter-of-fact. "And I'm sorry for it. I'll be more careful in the future." Penelope didn't know what to say to that. Men didn't apologize in her experience. They justified, they blamed, they raged. But they didn't stand there with honest regret in their eyes and promise to be more careful. "Thank you," she managed finally. "That's kind of you." He settled his hat back on his head, gave her another nod, and left. She watched through the window as he mounted a roan horse tied out front and rode off toward the edge of town. Something in her chest felt strange, like a knot slowly loosening. The days developed a pattern. Penelope worked at the laundry from dawn until late afternoon, then returned to the boarding house for supper. Vincent Quinn was often there, and she began to notice things about him despite herself. The way he always announced his presence before entering a room. The way he kept his hands visible and moved with a slowness that seemed deliberate when she was near. He never sat directly beside her at the table, never reached across her for anything, never raised his voice even in laughter. She began to relax incrementally, though she would not have admitted it even to herself. She could eat her meals without her stomach churning. She could stay in the common room after supper sometimes, sitting in the corner with her mending while the other boarders played cards or read newspapers. One evening, about 2 weeks after Vincent had arrived, she was struggling with a particularly stubborn stain in her own blouse when he spoke from across the room. "Salt and cold water if it's a blood stain, then some lemon juice and sun if you've got access to both." She looked up, surprised. "How do you know that?" "My mother ran a boarding house in Denver when I was growing up. I learned a fair bit about getting stains out of things." He smiled slightly, and there was something in that expression that made him look younger, less worn. "Cowboys are rough on their clothes." "That's certainly true." Despite herself, Penelope felt her lips curve in response. It was the first time she had smiled in weeks, maybe months. The expression felt foreign on her face. After that, they spoke occasionally. Brief exchanges, nothing too personal. He mentioned the Morrison Ranch, the cattle being prepared for the drive to Sacramento. She mentioned particularly difficult stains, the gossip Mrs. Mallory shared about the town. It was safe conversation, unthreatening, and Penelope found herself looking forward to those moments more than she cared to examine. In early September, a violent thunderstorm rolled through the Sierra Nevada foothills. The rain came down in sheets, turning the streets to rivers of mud and forcing everyone indoors. Penelope was trapped at the boarding house on her day off, restless and anxious. The other boarders had various occupations, and by late morning, only she and Vincent remained in the common room. He was reading a book near the window, his profile outlined against the gray light. She was attempting to sew a torn petticoat, but her stitches were uneven, her concentration scattered. When thunder cracked overhead, she jumped, pricking her finger with the needle. "Damn," she whispered, then flushed at her own language. "Storms make everyone jumpy," Vincent said without looking up from his book. "Nothing to be ashamed of. I'm not jumpy, just distracted." "All right." He turned a page, another roll of thunder closer this time. Penelope set down her sewing with more force than necessary. "I think I'll go upstairs. Miss Hart." His voice stopped her at the doorway. She turned, wary. He had closed his book, his finger marking his place. "Would you like me to read to you?" Sometimes it helps to focus on a story when the weather is bad. She should have said no. Should have gone upstairs to her small room and hidden under the quilts like she had done 100 times before. Instead, she heard herself say, "What are you reading, Shakespeare? Much Ado About Nothing." It's a comedy. Lots of arguing and mistaken identity and people being foolish about love. Despite her tension, Penelope felt a flicker of interest. "I've never read Shakespeare." "Then you're in for a treat, or a tedious afternoon depending on your taste for Elizabethan English." He gestured to the chair across from him, but not too close. "Join me," she sat, folding her hands in her lap. Vincent opened the book and began to read, his deep voice transforming the words into something musical, something alive. He read the part of Beatrice with a higher pitch that made Penelope's lips twitch, and Benedict with his natural tone. When he reached the verbal sparring between the two characters, she found herself leaning forward, caught up in their wit and wordplay. The storm raged outside, but inside, there was only the sound of his voice and the story unfolding between them. When he finally closed the book several hours later, the rain had diminished to a steady patter. Penelope realized she had forgotten to be afraid. She had spent an entire afternoon in a room alone with a man and had felt nothing but interest and enjoyment. "Thank you," she said softly. "That was wonderful. We can continue another time if you'd like. I've got several more plays in my pack." He stood slowly, stretching out his back. "I should head to the ranch. The horses will need tending after all this weather. In the rain." She looked toward the window, troubled. "It's still coming down pretty hard. I've been wetter." He gave her that slight smile again. "Take care, Miss Hart." After he left, Penelope sat in the empty room for a long time, pressing her hand to her chest where something warm had taken root. The cattle drive was scheduled to depart in mid-September. Vincent would be gone for nearly 3 weeks, he told the table at supper one evening. The Morrison Ranch was sending 300 head to Sacramento, where they would fetch good prices from the buyers heading north to Oregon. "It's dangerous work," Mrs. Chen said disapprovingly. "Rivers to cross, bandits on the roads, and the cattle themselves liable to stampede at any little thing." "All true," Vincent agreed, "but the pay is good, and Mr. Morrison needs experienced hands." Penelope felt an unexpected pang of concern. In the weeks since the storm, she and Vincent had developed something like friendship. They read Shakespeare together twice more, working through As You Like It and starting on Romeo and Juliet. He taught her to play chess, patiently explaining strategies and never mocking her mistakes. She told him about her work at the laundry, the way fabrics responded to different treatments, the satisfaction of transforming something dirty and worn into something clean and renewed. She did not tell him about Thomas Wardell. Did not tell him about the 3 years of marriage that had felt like 3 decades, the escalating violence, the fear that had become as familiar as breathing. but she thought sometimes that he knew anyway, from the way she flinched, from the careful distance she maintained, from the haunted look that must have lived in her eyes. "When do you leave?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. "Day after tomorrow, sunrise departure." He looked at her across the table, and something passed between them, some understanding or acknowledgement that neither was ready to name. The morning he left, Penelope woke before dawn and dressed quickly. She went downstairs and found Mrs. Chen already in the kitchen, kneading dough for the day's bread. "He's in the barn, readying his horse," the older woman said without looking up. Penelope didn't bother to pretend she didn't know who Mrs. Chen meant. She slipped out the back door and crossed the yard to the small barn where the boarders kept their mounts. Vincent was saddling the roan, his movements efficient and practiced. He looked up when she entered, surprise crossing his face. "I wanted to wish you safe travels," Penelope said, staying near the door. "Thank you." He cinched the saddle tight, checked the buckles. "I'll be back before October. I'll keep your place at the supper table." She tried to smile, but it felt shaky. Vincent paused in his preparations, his hands resting on the saddle horn. "Miss Hart, I wonder if I might ask you something." Her heart began to pound. "All right. When I get back, would you allow me to court you properly? I'd like to take you to dinner or a church social, or whatever you'd be comfortable with." He spoke carefully, watching her face. "I understand if the answer is no. I understand if I'm presuming too much, but I wanted to ask before I left so you could think about it while I'm gone." Penelope felt like all the air had left the barn. Court her. The idea was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. She had sworn she would never let another man close to her, never give anyone that kind of power over her life again. But Vincent wasn't like Thomas. Wasn't like any man she had known before. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know if I can." "That's all right. You don't have to decide now." He swung into the saddle, settling his weight with the ease of someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. "But think about it, Penelope. That's all I ask." It was the first time he had used her given name. The sound of it in his voice did something strange to her insides. "Be safe," she said again, and then she fled back to the house before she could say anything else. The weeks he was gone felt longer than they should have. Penelope worked at the laundry, took her meals at the boarding house, and tried not to think about Vincent Quinn riding through the wilderness with 300 head of cattle and all the dangers that entailed. But she thought about him anyway. Thought about his patience, his gentleness, the way he had learned to move around her like she was something precious and breakable. Was that love? She didn't know. The only marriage she had known was a nightmare. Her own parents had died when she was young, killed by cholera during an outbreak in Ohio. She had been raised by an aunt who viewed her as an obligation, and who had been only too happy to marry her off to Thomas Wardell at 17. Thomas had seemed charming at first, attentive and generous. It wasn't until after the wedding that she learned about his temper, his jealousy, his fists. She had spent 3 years walking on eggshells, trying to be quiet enough, obedient enough, invisible enough to avoid his rage. It never worked. There was always something to set him off: a dinner cooked wrong, a word spoken out of turn, a look he interpreted as defiance. She had learned to read the signs, to know when he was building toward violence, but knowing didn't help. There was nowhere to run, no one to help her. A man's wife was his property, to do with as he saw fit. When he died, she had waited only long enough to be sure he was really dead before taking what little money he had hidden in the house and buying a ticket west. California had sounded impossibly far away, impossibly safe. And Coloma, with its gold rush history and rough frontier spirit, seemed like a place where a woman could disappear and start over. She had not planned on Vincent Quinn. Mrs. Mallory noticed her distraction at work and called her out on it one afternoon. You're dragging around here like something died. What's got into you? Nothing, madam, just tired. Tired my left foot. You're mooning over that cowboy who stays at Chen's place. The older woman's eyes glinted with amusement. Don't bother denying it. I saw you two walking together after church last month. Penelope felt her face heat. We were just talking. Hum, and I'm the Queen of England. Mrs. Mallory dumped another load of dirty linens into the sorting pile. He's a good man from what I hear. Works hard, doesn't drink to excess, treats people decent. You could do worse. I'm not looking to do anything at all, Penelope said firmly, but that was a lie and she knew it. Vincent returned on the last day of September, riding into town with the rest of the Morrison ranch hands, all of them covered in trail dust and exhausted. Penelope heard about it from Mrs. Chen at supper, though Vincent himself didn't appear at the table that night. She told herself she wasn't disappointed, that she had no claim on his time, that his absence meant nothing. The next morning, she was hanging laundry in the yard behind the shop when she heard a familiar voice say, "Good morning, Miss Hart." She turned, and there he was, cleaned up and rested, his hat in his hands and something almost nervous in his expression. "Mr. Quinn, welcome back. Thank you, it's good to be back." He shifted his weight, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. The drive went well. Lost only 2 head, and the prices in Sacramento were better than expected. "I'm glad." She draped a sheet over the line, very aware of how close he was standing. Not too close, never too close, but close enough that she could see the sun lines at the corners of his eyes, the new scrapes on his knuckles. Penelope. There was that use of her name again, doing that same strange thing to her pulse. "Have you thought about what I asked before I left?" She had thought of little else, though she would rather die than admit it. "I have. And I'm afraid," she said simply. It was the most honest thing she had said to anyone in years. "I'm afraid of making another mistake, afraid of trusting someone who might hurt me. Afraid of losing the small bit of peace I've found here." Vincent was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "I can't promise I'll never disappoint you or that we'll never disagree, but I can promise I will never raise a hand to you in anger. I will never make you afraid of me, and if you need time to believe that, I'll wait as long as it takes." Tears burned in Penelope's eyes, sudden and unexpected. "Why? Why would you bother with someone as damaged as me? You're not damaged." He said it with such conviction that she almost believed him. "You're healing. There's a difference. And as for why, because when I'm with you, the world makes more sense. Because you're smart and strong and you've survived things that would have broken a lesser person. Because when you smile, which isn't often enough, it feels like the sun coming out from behind clouds." She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to hold back the sob that wanted to escape. "I don't know how to do this, how to trust again. Then we'll figure it out together. One day at a time, as slow as you need." He took a careful step forward, telegraphing his movement. "May I take you to dinner tonight? Just the hotel restaurant, nothing fancy. We'll sit at a table in full view of everyone, and I'll bring you back to the boarding house by 8 o'clock. It was such a small thing, really, just dinner. But it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff preparing to jump. Penelope looked at Vincent, at his honest face and patient eyes, and made her choice. "All right. Yes, dinner tonight." His smile was worth every ounce of fear churning in her stomach. The hotel restaurant was modest but clean, with checkered tablecloths and decent food. Vincent was true to his word, choosing a table near the window where they could be seen by anyone passing by. He pulled out her chair for her but didn't hover, giving her space to settle herself. "Have you ever had oysters?" he asked, perusing the menu. "No. Are they good?" "Depends on your taste. They're an acquired thing, but the stew here is excellent and the roast chicken is reliable." They ordered chicken and potatoes, and coffee that came strong and black. Conversation flowed more easily than Penelope expected. Vincent told her stories from the cattle drive the river crossing that nearly swept away one of the younger hands, the night the cattle stampeded over a rattlesnake, the stars that filled the sky so completely it felt like falling upward. She found herself telling him about Ohio, about her parents before they died, about the aunt who had raised her with duty but little affection. She didn't mention Thomas, and Vincent didn't press. Instead, he asked about her favorite childhood memories, and she found herself describing the small library in town, the joy of discovering new books, the way stories had been her escape from a world that felt gray and restrictive. "You still read much?" he asked. "When I can. Mrs. Chen has a small library in the boarding house, but I've been through most of them. I could lend you some of mine. I've got more than just Shakespeare, some Mark Twain, some poetry, a few dime novels that are more fun than literary. I'd like that." The meal passed in a warm glow of conversation and shared laughter. When Vincent finally escorted her back to the boarding house, Penelope realized she hadn't flinched once all evening, hadn't felt that familiar dread in the pit of her stomach, hadn't watched his hands for signs of rising temper. At the front door, he stopped and turned to her. "Thank you for taking a chance on me tonight. Thank you for being patient with me. May I see you again? Maybe we could go for a walk on Sunday after church." "Yes, I'd like that." He tipped his hat, smiled that soft smile that was starting to feel like home, and left. Penelope went inside and found Mrs. Chen waiting in the parlor with a knowing look. "Don't start," Penelope warned, but there was no heat in it. "I didn't say a word." The older woman's smile was triumphant anyway. October arrived with cooler temperatures and golden leaves on the few trees that dotted Coloma's landscape. Vincent and Penelope fell into a pattern of courtship that was gentle and gradual. They took walks through town, attended church socials, sat on the boarding house porch in the evenings while she worked on mending, and he whittled small figures from scraps of wood. He was working on a horse, the details intricate and careful. "You're very good at that," she observed one evening, watching his hands shape the wood with sure, steady strokes. "Picked it up from an old ranch hand in Montana. He could make whole scenes, cowboys and cattle, horses and wagons. This is simple compared to his work. It's still beautiful." He looked up at her, something warm in his eyes. "It's for you when I'm finished." "Vincent, you don't have to, I want to." He returned his attention to the carving. "I want to give you things, Penelope, not because I think you need them or because I expect anything in return. Just because it makes me happy to see you happy." She didn't know what to say to that. In her marriage to Thomas, every gift had come with strings attached, every kindness had been leverage for later demands. The idea that Vincent might give her something simply because he wanted to was foreign and wonderful. "Thank you," she said quietly. As the weeks passed, Penelope found herself relaxing more around him. She no longer jumped when he moved suddenly. She could sit beside him on the church pew without her heart racing. She even allowed him to take her hand once while they walked along the American River, his palm warm and calloused against hers, his grip gentle enough that she could pull away at any moment. But with the growing comfort came growing confusion. She was falling in love with him, she could admit that to herself now. But love brought vulnerability, and vulnerability meant the possibility of pain. What if she gave him her heart and he changed? What if the gentleness was an act, a lure to trap her into another nightmare? One evening in late October, her anxiety finally boiled over. They were in the boarding house parlor, and Vincent reached across to hand her a book he'd promised to lend her. His hand came up quickly, and Penelope flinched away so violently that she knocked over the oil lamp on the side table. It didn't break, but oil spilled across the wood, and in the scramble to right it, Vincent's hand brushed her arm. She jerked away from him, stumbling backward, her breath coming in gasps. "Don't touch me." Vincent froze, his hands immediately going up in a placating gesture. "All right, I'm not touching you. You're safe, Penelope, I promise you're safe." But the panic had her in its grip now, the memories flooding back. Thomas's hand rising, the split second of anticipation before the blow landed, the pain that bloomed like fire across her cheek, her ribs, her back. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear. "Penelope, listen to my voice. You're not there anymore. You're here in Coloma in Mrs. Chen's boarding house. It's October 1878. You're safe." Vincent's voice was steady, calm, anchoring. He had lowered himself to the floor, making himself smaller, less threatening. "I'm going to stay right here and you take all the time you need to come back to me." Gradually, the panic receded. Her breathing slowed. The room came back into focus, the faded wallpaper, the worn furniture, Vincent sitting on the floor several feet away with worry etched into every line of his face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be. You have nothing to apologize for." He stayed where he was, giving her space. "Do you want to talk about it? I was married before." The words came slowly, painfully. "His name was Thomas Wardell and he hurt me. For 3 years he hurt me. I tried to be good, tried to be what he wanted, but nothing was ever enough. He would hit me for burning dinner, for speaking too loud, for looking at another man, for breathing wrong. I thought I was going to die in that house." Vincent's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "How did you get away?" "He died. Got drunk and fell down the stairs, broke his neck." Everyone said what a tragedy it was, what a shame for such a young man to die so suddenly. No one knew what he did to me, or maybe they knew and just didn't care. She slid down the wall until she was sitting, hugging her knees. "I took his money and ran as far west as I could get. I thought I'd be safe here, thought I could start over. You can. You are. But I'm broken, Vincent. I flinch at shadows. I panic when someone moves too fast. I don't know if I'll ever be normal again." "You're not broken." He said it with such certainty. "You're wounded, and wounds take time to heal. But healing doesn't mean going back to who you were before. It means becoming someone new, someone stronger, and you're already doing that. How can you want someone like me? Someone with so much damage, because you're you. Because your past doesn't define your future. Because I see who you are underneath all that pain, and she's remarkable." He shifted slightly, drawing her attention. "Can I tell you something about me?" She nodded, wiping her eyes. "My father was a drunk, a mean one. He'd come home from the saloons and take his temper out on my mother, on me and my brothers. I was the oldest, so I tried to protect them, but I was just a kid. Couldn't do much." His voice was rough with old pain. "When I was 15, he came after my mother with a whiskey bottle. I stepped between them and we fought. I was bigger than him by then, stronger. I beat him bad enough that he never came home again, just disappeared into whatever bottle would have him. Vincent, I'm so sorry. I'm telling you this because I understand what it's like to be afraid. To carry that fear even after the danger is gone. For years, I was terrified I'd turn into him, that the violence was in my blood and one day I'd hurt someone I loved just like he did." He looked at her directly, his eyes fierce. "But I chose differently. I chose to be gentle, to be patient, to learn to control my temper and my hands. And I will choose that every single day for the rest of my life, especially with you." Penelope felt something crack open in her chest, some tight knot of fear and shame loosening its grip. "I want to believe you." "Then believe me. And when doubt creeps in, which it will, tell me. We'll talk through it together. I'm not going anywhere, Penelope. Not unless you tell me to go." She looked at him sitting there on the floor, This man who had learned to move slowly around her, who had chosen gentleness over violence, who saw her pain and didn't run from it. And she made a decision. "I'm falling in love with you," she said, her voice shaking. "And it terrifies me." His face transformed, hope and joy and tenderness all at once. "I'm already in love with you, have been for weeks, and I know you're scared. That's all right. Love is scary even when you haven't been hurt the way you have. But I promise you, Penelope, I will spend every day proving to you that my love is safe, that I'm safe." "How do we do this?" she asked. "How do I learn to trust again, one moment at a time? One day at a time, we go as slow as you need, and we talk about things. You tell me when you're scared, and I tell you when I'm worried I've overstepped. We figure it out together." She studied his face, saw the sincerity there, and felt the last of her resistance crumble. "All right. Together, then." He smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. Together. They sat there on opposite sides of the parlor floor for a long time, just talking. Vincent told her more about his childhood, about his mother who had eventually remarried a kind man and found happiness in her later years. About his brothers, scattered across the West, working ranches and mines and living their own lives. Penelope told him about the first time Thomas had hit her, 3 weeks into their marriage, and how she had made excuses for him, convinced herself it was her fault. "It wasn't," Vincent said firmly. "It was never your fault. A man who hits a woman is a coward and a brute, and nothing she does or doesn't do justifies it. I wish I'd believed that then. You believe it now. That's what matters, when Mrs. Chen found them an hour later, still sitting on the floor and talking in low voices. She just shook her head and brought them tea. "You two are going to catch your death down there. At least sit on the furniture like civilized people." They moved to the sofa, maintaining a respectful distance, and continued their conversation late into the night. By the time Vincent finally said goodnight and headed to his own room, something fundamental had shifted between them. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. She had named it, shared it, and found that it had less power in the light. November brought rain and colder temperatures. Vincent continued working at the Morrison Ranch, but he spent every free moment with Penelope. They read books together, took walks when the weather allowed, and shared meals at the boarding house. He was teaching her to play the harmonica, a battered instrument he'd carried with him for years. "You have to breathe through it, not just blow," he instructed, his hands guiding hers to the correct position. "Feel the reeds vibrate." She tried again, producing a slightly less wheezy sound than before. "I'm terrible at this. You're learning. There's a difference." He played a quick melody, the notes sweet and clear. "It took me months to sound even passable. You're doing fine." Mrs. Mallory had given Penelope Sundays off, recognizing that the young woman deserved time for her budding courtship. On those days, Vincent would take her exploring around Coloma down to the river where gold had first been discovered 30 years earlier, up into the foothills to see the changing leaves, through the remnants of mining camps that had boomed and busted in the span of a few years. "It's hard to imagine this place 30 years ago," Penelope said one afternoon as they walked through an abandoned camp, the wooden structures weathered and collapsing. "All the people rushing here, hoping to strike it rich. Most of them went home poorer than they came," Vincent said. "But some stayed, built something real. That's what I'd like to do someday, stay in Coloma, maybe, or somewhere like it. Buy a piece of land, build a house, raise some horses." He glanced at her, something hopeful and nervous in his expression. "Have a family if I'm lucky." Penelope's heart skipped. "That sounds nice. Would you want that? Someday, I mean. Not now, not until you're ready, but eventually." She thought about it seriously, trying to imagine a future that didn't involve fear and pain. Trying to imagine a home that was safe, a marriage that was partnership instead of prison. With Vincent, it didn't seem impossible. "Yes," she said quietly. "Someday I think I would." His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. They walked back to town in comfortable silence, the future spreading out before them like a map waiting to be drawn. In early December, Vincent asked if he could kiss her. They were standing on the boarding house porch after an evening church social, the air crisp and cold, their breath visible in the lamplight. "I've been wanting to for weeks," he admitted. "But I wanted to ask first, wanted you to have a choice." Penelope's heart was racing, but not with fear. With anticipation, with nervousness, with the strange giddy feeling of wanting something for herself. "Yes, you can kiss me." He moved slowly, giving her time to change her mind, one hand coming up to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. When his lips met hers, it was soft and sweet, nothing demanding or forceful. Just a question asked and answered, a promise made in the touch of mouths and the mingling of breath. When they parted, Penelope was smiling, truly smiling, the expression feeling more natural on her face than it had in years. That was nice. Just nice. His eyes danced with amusement. Very nice. Exceptionally nice. She laughed, the sound surprising her with its lightness. "Can we do it again?" "Anytime you want." They did, several more times on that porch, each kiss a little less tentative than the last. When they finally went inside, Mrs. Chen took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly, but said nothing. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Penelope stared at the ceiling and marveled at how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been running from a nightmare, convinced she would never feel safe again. Now she was falling in love, allowing herself to hope for a future she had thought impossible. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Christmas approached with surprising speed. The boarding house residents were planning a celebration, and Penelope volunteered to help Mrs. Chen with the cooking. She had learned a few Chinese dishes from the older woman, and they planned to serve both traditional American fare and some of Mrs. Chen's native recipes. "You are happy now," Mrs. Chen observed one afternoon while they were preparing dough for dumplings. "It wasn't a question. I am," Penelope admitted. "Happier than I've been in a long time, maybe happier than I've ever been." "That cowboy is good for you. He has kind eyes." "He does." Penelope folded the dough carefully, mimicking Mrs. Chen's expert movements. "He wants to marry me eventually. He hasn't asked yet, but he's mentioned it in roundabout ways. And what do you want?" "I want to say yes. But I'm scared. What if I'm making another mistake? What if he changes after we're married?" Mrs. Chen set down her rolling pin and looked at Penelope with stern compassion. "That other man, the one who hurt you, he did not change after marriage. He showed you who he was and you were too young to recognize the signs. But this Vincent, he has shown you who he is for months now. He has been patient, gentle, respectful. He has earned your trust slowly, carefully. That is not the behavior of a man who will change into a monster." "How can you be sure?" "I cannot be sure. No one can be sure of anything in this life. But I can tell you that I have seen many men in my years, and I have learned to recognize the good ones from the bad. Vincent Quinn is one of the good ones. If you let your fear keep you from happiness, you give that dead man power over you forever. Is that what you want?" Penelope considered this, her hands working the dough automatically. "No, I don't want Thomas to have any more power over me." "Then take your happiness with both hands and hold on to it. You deserve it, child." The Christmas celebration was a joyous affair. The boarding house was decorated with pine boughs and ribbons, the smell of roasted meat and baking bread filling the air. The residents exchanged small gifts, handmade items mostly, tokens of affection and appreciation. Vincent gave Penelope the carved horse he had been working on, the details exquisite down to the flowing mane and muscled haunches. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "Vincent, this must have taken you hours." "It did, but it was time well spent." He smiled at her, that gentle smile that made her heart flutter. "I'm glad you like it." She had knitted him a scarf, the stitches somewhat uneven but serviceable. He wrapped it around his neck immediately, proclaiming it the finest scarf he'd ever owned, and refused to take it off for the rest of the evening. After dinner, someone produced a fiddle and the furniture was pushed back for dancing. Vincent asked Penelope for a dance, and she accepted despite her nervousness. She had never been a good dancer, and Thomas had ridiculed her attempts mercilessly. But Vincent was patient, guiding her through the steps, holding her carefully but securely. "See, you're doing fine," he murmured as they turned in a simple waltz. "I'm stepping on your feet." "Haven't felt a thing." He grinned at her, and she couldn't help but smile back. They danced several more songs, until Penelope was breathless and laughing, the room spinning around her in a blur of light and music and joy. When they finally stopped, Vincent led her to the porch for some air, both of them flushed and happy. "Penelope," he said, his expression turning serious. "I know we've talked around this for a while, but I need to ask you properly. I love you. I want to spend my life with you, build a home with you, wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. Will you marry me?" Her breath caught. This was the moment she had been anticipating and dreading in equal measure. The moment when she had to decide if she was brave enough to try again, to risk her heart and her safety on the promise of love. But as she looked at Vincent, at his honest face and patient eyes, at the scarf she had made him still wrapped around his neck, at the man who had learned to move slowly around her, and had never once made her regret trusting him, the decision was easier than she expected. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and sure. "Yes, I'll marry you." His joy was incandescent. He swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around while she laughed in surprise. When he set her down, he kissed her with a passion that had been carefully restrained for months, and she kissed him back just as fiercely, pouring all her hope and love and trust into that embrace. They were married in January 1879, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Coloma. Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Mallory stood as witnesses, along with several hands from the Morrison ranch. Penelope wore a new dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, pale blue with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Vincent wore his best suit, the one he'd brought from Montana and kept carefully preserved for special occasions. The vows were traditional, but they had added one line at Vincent's insistence. When the minister asked if he would love and cherish her, Vincent added clearly, "In gentleness and respect, all the days of my life." Penelope's eyes had filled with tears at that, understanding what he was promising her. They spent their wedding night at the hotel, in the nicest room available. Vincent was infinitely patient, letting Penelope set the pace, checking in with her constantly to make sure she was comfortable. The intimacy was nothing like her experiences with Thomas. There was no pain, no fear, no sense of violation. Just tenderness and love and the joy of two people choosing each other freely. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the lamplight, Vincent traced gentle patterns on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" "I'm more than all right. I'm happy." She turned to look at him, this man who was now her husband. "Thank you for being patient with me, for giving me time to heal. Always." He kissed her forehead. "We have our whole lives ahead of us, Penelope, and I promise you every day will be better than the last." It was a promise he kept. They rented a small house on the outskirts of Coloma, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs. Penelope continued working at the laundry, and Vincent at the Morrison ranch, both of them saving money toward their dream of buying land. In the evenings, they would sit on their tiny porch and watch the sun set over the foothills, planning their future together. By spring, Penelope realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex swirl of emotions: joy, certainly, but also fear. She had never imagined herself as a mother, had never dared to hope for children during her marriage to Thomas. The idea of bringing a life into the world was overwhelming. "What if I'm not good at it?" she asked Vincent one night, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "What if I make mistakes?" "Then you'll make mistakes and we'll figure it out together. That's what parents do." He covered her hand with his own. "You're going to be a wonderful mother, Penelope. You have so much love to give, and this child is going to be lucky to have you." "You really believe that?" "With all my heart." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Penelope struggled with sickness in the early months. Mrs. Mallory gave her lighter duties at the laundry, and Vincent insisted she rest whenever she felt tired. He read to her in the evenings from their growing collection of books, and worked on carving a cradle from a beautiful piece of oak, wood Mr. Morrison had given him. In November 1879, after 12 hours of labor attended by the local midwife and Mrs. Chen, Penelope gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel Vincent Quinn, and he had his father's blue-gray eyes and his mother's dark blonde hair. Vincent held his son for the first time with a reverence that made Penelope's heart overflow. "Hello, Samuel," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your papa, and I promise you're going to have a good life. You're going to know you're loved every single day. You're going to grow up safe and happy, and you'll never have to be afraid." Watching him with their baby, Penelope felt the last lingering shadows of her past life fade away. This was her family now. This was home. The years passed with the steady rhythm of seasons changing and children growing. Samuel was followed by a daughter, Caroline, in 1881, and then another son, William, in 1883. Each birth was easier than the last, and Penelope discovered she loved being a mother, loved the chaos and joy of a house full of children. Vincent was a devoted father, patient with scraped knees and childhood tears, firm but fair with discipline. He taught Samuel to ride and rope, showed Caroline how to whittle like he did, and spent hours playing with baby William in the evenings after work. The children adored him, and more importantly, they never feared him. They ran to him when they were hurt, climbed all over him when he came home from work, and trusted him absolutely. In 1885, Vincent and Penelope finally saved enough money to buy their own land, 50 acres about 5 miles outside of Coloma, with a creek running through it and good grazing for horses. Vincent quit working for the Morrison Ranch and began building their dream, starting with a modest house that he expanded over the years as their family and fortunes grew. They raised horses, training them for ranch work and selling them throughout California and Nevada. Vincent had a gift with the animals, a patience and understanding that made even the most skittish horse trust him. Penelope managed the books and the household and discovered she had a good head for business. Together, they built something successful and sustainable. The ranch became known throughout the region for the quality of its horses and the integrity of its owners. People came from as far away as Sacramento to buy Quinn horses, knowing they would get animals that were well-trained, healthy, and fairly priced. By 1890, when Penelope was 31 and Vincent was 34, they had established themselves as pillars of the Coloma community. Their children were healthy, and happy Samuel was 10 and already showing signs of his father's way with horses. Caroline was 9 and loved reading as much as her mother, and William was 7 and kept everyone laughing with his endless energy and mischief. One evening in late summer, after the children were in bed, Vincent and Penelope sat on the porch of their expanded home and looked out over their land. The horses were dark shapes in the pasture, the creek murmured in the distance, and the first stars were appearing in the deepening sky. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Penelope asked, leaning into her husband's side. "Sometimes, but I try not to dwell on the past too much. The present is pretty wonderful." He kissed the top of her head. "Though I am curious, if you could go back and talk to the woman who arrived in Coloma 12 years ago, what would you tell her?" Penelope considered this seriously. "I'd tell her that healing is possible, that there are good men in the world, men who choose gentleness over violence. That love doesn't have to hurt, and that she's stronger than she knows." "She was strong," Vincent said. "Is strong. You survived something terrible and built a beautiful life on the other side of it. I'm in awe of you, Penelope. Every single day." She turned to kiss him, this man who had learned to move slowly around her all those years ago, who had proven through 1,000 small actions that his love was safe. "And I'm grateful for you, for your patience, for your kindness, for choosing me. Always the easiest choice I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them, two people who had found each other against the odds and built something lasting. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and safe. And out in the pasture, the horses moved like shadows in the moonlight, creatures of strength and grace that thrived under gentle hands. The years continued to unfold with their share of joys and challenges. The ranch prospered, and Vincent and Penelope expanded their operation, hiring a few ranch hands to help with the work. Samuel grew into a fine young man with his father's patience and his mother's determination. Caroline proved to have a gift with numbers and began helping more with the business side of things. William discovered he could charm just about anyone and became invaluable at county fairs and horse sales. In 1895, Samuel announced his engagement to a young woman named Emma Reyes, whose father owned the feed store in town. The wedding was a grand affair by Coloma standards, held at the ranch with half the town in attendance. Watching her eldest son marry filled Penelope with pride and a touch of bittersweet nostalgia for his childhood. "We're getting old," she said to Vincent as they watched Samuel and Emma dance their first dance as husband and wife. "Speak for yourself. I'm still in my prime." He grinned at her, the expression as boyish as it had been when they first met. The gray in his hair and the deeper lines around his eyes only made him more handsome in her opinion. "Your prime, certainly, though you did complain about your back this morning after moving those hay bales." "That's just good sense, not age. Those bales were heavy." She laughed and let him pull her onto the makeshift dance floor. They had been married 16 years, and she still loved dancing with him, still felt safe in his arms, still looked at him and felt grateful for the life they had built together. Caroline married a few years later, to a school teacher from Sacramento who shared her love of books and learning. They settled in the city, where Caroline helped run a bookstore and raised her own family. William eventually took over more of the ranch operations, proving himself a capable horseman and businessman, despite his tendency toward jokes and pranks. By 1900, as the new century dawned, Vincent and Penelope were grandparents several times over. Their house was frequently filled with visiting children and grandchildren, the noise and chaos a far cry from the quiet fear of Penelope's first marriage. She loved every minute of it, the sticky hands and endless questions, the laughter and occasional tears, the sense of legacy and continuation. One afternoon, in the spring of 1901, Penelope found an old trunk in the attic that she had brought from Missouri all those years ago. She hadn't opened it in decades, hadn't wanted to confront the memories it contained. But now, with the sounds of her grandchildren playing in the yard below, she felt strong enough to look. Inside were a few items from her life with Thomas, a wedding photo that showed a young, frightened girl beside a man with cold eyes, some letters from her aunt, a dress she had worn to church. She looked at these artifacts of her past and felt nothing but distant pity for the woman she had been. Vincent found her there, sitting among the scattered memories. "You all right? I'm fine. Just thinking about how far I've come, how far we've come." She held up the wedding photo. "I can barely recognize her, that scared girl with no hope." "She's still in there," Vincent said, settling beside her on the attic floor with a slight grunt. "She's part of who you are, but she's not all of who you are anymore. You're also the woman who built a business, raised 3 amazing children, and created a home full of love and laughter. You're strong and brave and so full of grace. I couldn't have done any of it without you. We did it together. That's what partnership means." He took the photo from her hands and studied it for a moment. "You know what I see when I look at this? I see a survivor. Someone who endured something terrible and came out the other side. That took incredible strength. I didn't feel strong. I felt broken. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is keep going when everything in you wants to give up. You did that. You saved yourself, Penelope. I just had the honor of being there while you healed." She leaned into him, this man who still moved with care around her even though she no longer flinched at sudden movements. Some habits, she supposed, were too deeply ingrained to break, but she didn't mind. His gentleness was a language of love she had learned to read and speak fluently. They closed the trunk and left it in the attic, the past where it belonged. Downstairs, their grandchildren were clamoring for attention, and Vincent had promised to teach the older ones some new rope tricks. Life was calling, full and rich and beautiful. In 1905, the ranch celebrated 20 years of operation with a large gathering of friends, family, and business associates. It was a testament to what Vincent and Penelope had built together, not just a successful business, but a legacy of integrity, quality, and fair dealing. Samuel ran the day-to-day operations now, with William as his partner, leaving Vincent and Penelope to enjoy a semi-retirement filled with grandchildren and travel. They took a trip to San Francisco, staying in a fine hotel and attending the opera. They visited Caroline in Sacramento and spent long days in her bookstore, discussing literature and philosophy. They traveled to Montana so Vincent could show Penelope where he grew up, introducing her to his mother and stepfather, who were still alive and thriving in their 70s. Every place they went, every experience they had, Penelope marveled at her life. She was 50 years old, healthy and happy, surrounded by love and security. The young woman who had fled Missouri with nothing but fear and determination would scarcely believe what she had become. One evening, sitting on their porch as they had done countless times over the years, watching the sun set over their land, Vincent said, "I have something to tell you." Penelope looked at him, noting the serious tone. "What is it?" "I was talking to Doc Patterson in town yesterday. He says my heart is starting to struggle. Nothing immediate, but it's something I need to be aware of." He held up a hand as she started to speak. "I'm not worried. I've had a good life, Penelope, a wonderful life, and however much time I have left, I want to spend it with you." Fear clutched at her chest, but she pushed it down. They had faced challenges before, had weathered storms together. This would be no different. "Then we'll take care of you. Follow the doctor's orders, take it easy, and you'll be fine. I plan to be around for a good while yet. I want to see more grandchildren, watch the ranch continue to prosper, grow old and gray with you." He smiled, but there was something wistful in it. "But I also want you to know that loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life." You took a chance on a cowboy with nothing but patience and hope to offer, and you gave me everything in return. Vincent, don't talk like that. You're scaring me. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just being honest. Life is precious and uncertain, and I don't want to leave anything unsaid. He took her hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after so many years together. I love you. I have loved you from the first time you smiled at me over Shakespeare. I will love you until my last breath and beyond, if such things are possible. Tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of love, not fear. I love you too. You saved me, Vincent. You showed me that love could be gentle and safe. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible. We saved each other, he corrected gently. You showed me that my past didn't have to define my future. That I could choose to be different from my father, could build something good and lasting. You gave me purpose and hope and a family. We're partners in this, always have been. They sat together as the stars emerged, holding hands and remembering. Their first meeting on the boarding house steps. The way he had learned to announce his presence, to move slowly, to give her space to heal. The Shakespeare readings and chess games. The first kiss on that cold December night. Their wedding, their children, the ranch they had built together. It was a rich tapestry of shared experiences and mutual devotion. Vincent lived for another 10 years after that conversation, defying the doctor's concerns through sheer stubbornness and Penelope's devoted care. They watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated silver anniversaries for 2 of their children, and saw the ranch continue to thrive under Samuel and William's management. On a quiet evening in March 1915, with Penelope holding his hand and their children gathered around his bed, Vincent Quinn passed peacefully in his sleep. He was 64 years old, and he died as he had lived, surrounded by love, secure in the knowledge that his life had mattered. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched, ranch hands he had mentored, neighbors he had helped, children he had taught, and countless others who had experienced his gentle kindness. The preacher spoke of his integrity and compassion, but Penelope knew the greatest testament to Vincent's character was the family he had raised and the love he had inspired. She grieved him deeply, but without the paralysis of fear that had once defined her. She had loved him fully, trusted him completely, and built a life with him that was everything she had never dared to hope for. His death was a loss, but not a tragedy. He had lived well and died peacefully, and that was all anyone could ask. Penelope continued to live at the ranch, helping where she could but mostly enjoying her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She became the family matriarch, the keeper of stories and traditions, the link between past and present. She told the children about their grandfather, about his patience and kindness, about the way he had learned to move slowly around her until she learned to trust again. On her 70th birthday in 1925, surrounded by 3 generations of family, Penelope looked around at what she and Vincent had created together and felt profound gratitude. She had survived horrors, overcome fear, and built something beautiful from the ashes of her pain. She had loved and been loved in return, had raised children who were happy and whole, had created a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. That night, sitting alone on the porch she had shared with Vincent for so many years, she looked up at the stars and whispered, "Thank you. For your patience, for your love, for teaching me what gentleness looks like. I hope wherever you are you know how much you were loved, how much you still are loved." The wind rustled through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied softly. It felt like an answer, like a promise that love transcends even death. Penelope smiled and went inside to bed, secure in the knowledge that she had lived fully and loved well, and that was enough. She lived another 10 years, passing peacefully in her sleep at the age of 80. The ranch continued through her children and grandchildren, the Quinn name becoming synonymous with quality horses and fair dealing throughout California. The house Vincent had built and expanded remained in the family for generations, a testament to what two wounded souls had created when they chose to trust again. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting over the foothills and the horses were dark shapes in the pasture, the current inhabitants of the Quinn Ranch would swear they could see two figures sitting on the porch, a man with gray-blue eyes who moved with careful grace, and a woman with dark blonde hair who smiled without fear. They were always holding hands, always looking at each other with the devotion of souls who had found their home in one another. It was just a trick of the light, of course. But it was a comforting story nonetheless, a reminder that true love endures beyond mortality, and that kindness and patience can heal even the deepest wounds. The story of Vincent Quinn and Penelope Hart became family legend, passed down through generations as an example of what love should be: gentle, patient, understanding, and strong. Their great-great-grandchildren would grow up hearing about the cowboy who learned to move slowly around the woman who flinched, and how that simple act of compassion had blossomed into a love story for the ages. It was a reminder that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is move gently, speak softly, and give someone time to heal. That real love doesn't demand or force or hurt. It waits. It understands, and it creates a safe space for damaged souls to bloom again. The Quinn Ranch still stands today, over a century after Vincent and Penelope first broke ground. The horses are still raised with patience and care. The business is still run with integrity. And somewhere in the family archives is a carved wooden horse, lovingly preserved, that represents the beginning of a great love story. Next to it is a worn harmonica and a blue dress with white lace at the collar, artifacts of lives well lived and love that conquered fear. And if you ever find yourself driving through Coloma, California, past the rolling foothills and alongside the American River where gold was first discovered, you might pass a ranch with a weathered sign that reads Quinn Horse Ranch, EST, 1885. If you look closely at sunset, you might even catch a glimpse of two figures on the porch, holding hands and watching the stars emerge. They're not really there, of course. But love like theirs leaves an imprint on the world, a reminder that goodness and gentleness can triumph over pain and fear, and that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to move slowly, speak softly, and love without reservation to change everything. The children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of Vincent and Penelope Quinn carry forward the lessons learned from that first careful courtship, that trust must be earned through consistent action, that gentleness is strength, not weakness, that patience can heal wounds that time alone cannot touch. They teach their children to move with care around those who have been hurt, to recognize signs of fear and trauma, to understand that healing is a process that cannot be rushed. In this way, the legacy of a cowboy who learned to move slowly around a frightened woman extends far beyond their own lifetimes, touching countless lives and relationships. It's a testament to the power of choosing compassion over impatience, understanding over judgment, love over fear. And it's a reminder that everyone we meet is fighting battles we know nothing about, and that sometimes the kindest thing we can do is simply move slowly, speak gently, and give them space to find their own way back to trust. This is the story of Vincent Quinn and Penelope Hart, two wounded souls who found healing in each other's gentleness. It's a story of the American West, of hard work and harsh landscapes, but more than that, it's a story of the human heart's capacity to mend, to trust again, to love despite every reason not to. It's a story that deserves to be remembered and retold, generation after generation, as a beacon of hope for anyone who has ever been broken and wondered if they could be whole again. The answer, Vincent and Penelope would tell you, is yes. Healing is possible. Trust can be rebuilt. Love can be safe and gentle and true. It just takes time, patience, and someone willing to move slowly until you're ready to move with them. And that, ultimately, is the greatest love story of all, not the passionate whirlwind, but the patient, unwavering devotion that says, "I will wait for you. I will be gentle with you. I will love you at the pace you need, for as long as it takes." That is the legacy of the Quinn Ranch, and the gift Vincent and Penelope gave to all who came after them.